There comes a point in a gaming YouTuber's life when they decide to make their own game. After all, they understand the market better than any publisher or developer could and realise that only they can create the next big thing. They might not know how to code, but the guy that creates their thumbnails has a second cousin that does, so a new Patreon tier is created, a Kickstarter is set up and an announcement is made. Out of context features are announced, concept art is bandied about and small talk becomes big promises. Skip to the end, and either no game arrives or when it does, it's an immediate failure. This is of course understandable. Making a game is difficult. It takes time, money, skill and a solid idea to have even a fleeting chance of success. However, designing a game is a fascinating creative process that does interest me and I thought I might give it a go. Hi, I'm Kaluven, and as this is the 2000 subscriber special, today I'm going to tell you about my idea for an RTS. I'm not going to make it, nor am I going to ask for your money to even try, but as a purely creative exercise I'm going to outline what I would do if I won a development studio in a 90s style breakfast show phoning competition. But where do we even start? Well, I'm the old fashioned type, so I would probably start with a setting and a story and let those dictate gameplay and features. I'm a big science fiction fan, but I also like my fiction grounded in a touch of reality, so I'd probably steer clear of space magic, disintegrators and time travel. Let's pick a year in the future. We can't use 2258 as that's Babylon 5, but a couple of hundred years ahead of us doesn't seem like a bad idea. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes laying out the key points of the backstory for this whole venture. If you find this sort of thing dull and boring, then this probably isn't the video for you. But for everyone else, sit back and let the cliches commence. It's the year 2224 and Earth has seen better days. Years of resource exploitation and pollution have taken its toll, and although much of the mining now takes place elsewhere in the system, it's hardly a utopia. Deep space telescopes have recently observed a fluctuation in Proxima Centauri, one of the closest stars to our system, and it's believed that the changes in output would render one of the planets habitable. A colonization program is established and 2 great ships are constructed to travel the vast distance and establish settlements. These ships won't reach speeds in excess of 0.1 light, so it's still a 40-year journey, but each one is more of a city than a luxury liner and will carry its passengers, their children and their future children out amongst the stars. Both ships, the Fortune and the Bravados, are completed, crewed, trialled and dispatched over the next 20 years, and by 2284 reach their destination. 40 years in deep space and several changes in leaderships have created some differences in their makeup and objectives. The inhabitants of the Bravados are keen to avoid the mistakes of old Earth and have developed several crucial tenets within their society to limit environmental damage and temper the exploitation of local resources once their society has reached a sustainable level. They don't want to shun technology and go back to the days of pitchforks and hand tools, but they have developed a weary view of progression for its own sake. On the other side, the occupants of the Fortune have developed an almost reverential respect for technology itself. It has clothed them, fed them and carried them to safety for 2 generations, and they believe that any problem created by the quest for technology can be solved by more of it. Arrival at Proxima Centauri presents an unexpected problem. Rather than a single inhabitable world, there are 2. Originally both ships were planned to make landfall and establish colonies on the opposite side of the planet, but the leaders of the Bravados believe that the new discovery presents a better opportunity. It's slightly smaller and shows less signs of important mineral deposits, but it has more immediately usable landmass and would require less atmospheric modification. After months of negotiations, no agreement could be found, so each ship decides to go its separate way. Those on the Fortune make landfall as planned and establish Fortune City on the freshly renamed planet of Fortuna. The second ship established itself on the newly discovered planet of Bravados with the city of Valencia. 120 years pass, and although there are trials and tribulations, both colonies are successfully established. The cities grow suburbs and new smaller settlements spring up. Contact is established on Earth. It takes 8 years for a message to make a round trip, but populations start to grow exponentially as several more colony ships arrive and join the rapidly expanding missions. Each side establishes a small orbital and then extra-orbital presence, and despite a few tense moments, peaceful relations are maintained, mostly due to the abundance of resources and little need for competition. Something odd is detected on the edge of the system, and in 2404 both planets send a joint mission to investigate. That odd something happens to be three somethings, one of which can only be described as a wormhole, and the other two appear to be two very large but identical spacecraft of an unrecognisable design. Years of investigation reveal that each of these craft are dormant but highly automated, and are actually composed of two fully independent sections, and have a power source of unexplainable magnitude and complexity. Furthermore, there appears to be an archway that allows the instant transport of inert or organic matter from one section to the other, even if those sections are separated by a great distance. Further investigation reveals that power is generated by the processing of a previously unknown organic compound, reported by each ship at 14%. This fascinates the scientific communities of both Fortuna and Bravados, but provides little initial application. Although vast gains are made in understanding the operating controls of each vessel, the underlying technology is so different and advanced from anything known that not a lot can be learned or reverse engineered from it. Furthermore, the wormhole appears to be nothing more than a curiosity. Attempts to navigate it with automated vessels have ended in failure, and nothing has been gained from attempts to probe the other side. However, both societies have needs, and power is always one of them. Fortuna have satisfied their current requirements, but the measures they've had to take are creating environmental damage that they don't yet know how to remedy. Citizens of Bravados are struggling to meet their own needs, as the steps they would have to take would start to cause the kind of damage that they swore they would avoid. A decision is reached. Each faction takes possession of one of what they are now calling the Colossi, lands one section of it, and hooks the power generated up to their grid. They're all too aware that the organic fuel reserves will run out at some point, but they predict this will take some years and will hopefully have a better solution before that point. 9 years pass, and on the day that the fuel reserves reach 5%, the spaceborne half of each of the Colossi comes to life of its own accord and takes itself and anyone who happened to be on board at the time directly into the wormhole. They arrive in an uncharted system with twin stars on a single planet, hundreds of light years from known space. The planet isn't just habitable, it was clearly once inhabited long ago, and furthermore it appears to host a little understood but much desired organic flora. It's not exactly what you would call abundant. The organism appears to only flourish in certain areas when the twin stars are in a specific position relative to the planet. However, the purpose of the Colossi is now clear, as the organism can be harvested in one location and then transported back to the matching section in a remote location. A flurry of activity does reveal some limitations in the transportation system. As well as being limited by the physical size of the archway, the system appears to require some downtime after each cycle, with a recharge time related to the mass being transported. You could send a person or a decent quantity of biomass through every few seconds, but the materials required to build heavy machinery could put the whole system down for a day or two. And that's our rough setting, explained in a couple of pages. Hardly suitable for a film, novel or short story, but I think it's got just enough juice to allow us to base a game upon it. We've got two different factions competing over a limited resource in a distant place, and we've got a mystical MacGuffin that serves as our version of oil, spice, tiberium or unobtainium. We've got a reason to gather other materials locally, and an explanation of how we can get limited manpower to show up when needed in a way that precludes the sending of a massive mechanised army. This gives us the scope for some decent skirmishes that stop short of all-out war, and means we can design a game with an appropriate scale. We've also got lots of unanswered questions that can be a key component in our story campaign. Who built the Colossi? Why did they show up when they did? And who previously inhabited the world and what happened to them? Perhaps they or someone else related to them will show up in a DLC and we'll have a third faction. We've given ourselves room for manoeuvre and room for expansion, and presented questions that hopefully our players will enjoy finding the answers to. We'll probably need to start naming a few more things, so humans being humans, let's assume they dubbed this new planet Copia, after the Latin word for plenty. This makes me want to call the organic fuel Copia, but that's a little too silly, so let's call it Copus. I envisage that standard operations evolved as follows. Sensors detected a potential Copus bloom on the planet based on some organic signatures and the alignment of the twin suns. Fortuna and Bravados each send down a party to collect the Copus in question, and then an argument ensues over who was there first. The next time this happens, one of them sends down a guy with a gun to make their claim. And then the next time the other responds with 2 guys with guns. Inevitably, shots are fired, and future missions are accompanied by stronger and stronger security detachments, until armed conflict is standard fare. I'm sure diplomacy was attempted, but with both sides in need and not enough raw material to go around, the leaders back home can do little more than lodge official protests and respond in kind. Neither faction has the desire, resources, or ability to wage an interplanetary war, so for the moment conflict is restricted to the land of plenty. From a gameplay perspective, I really want to focus on manpower as a resource. In pretty much every base building real-time strategy game I can think of, manpower is used as nothing other than a limiter. It's a cap, a restriction, something used to pace growth and hinder army size. This is a bit odd if you think about it, as throughout the history of man it's the only thing that is absolutely essential to conflict. You don't need tanks, planes, bombs, ships or crossbows to have a war, as long as you've got 2 opposed nations full of humans that know how to pick up a stick and sharpen one end. So our in-game economy is going to revolve around 2 resources, manpower and materials. Manpower is gained by the collecting of the Copus. We gather it up, it gets shipped up to the Colossus, and then in return we're sent personnel to carry our weapons, man our vehicles and staff our buildings. Materials are gained by collecting ore. This is the more mundane of the 2, but as we have to produce pretty much everything we want to use locally, this is our basic construction resource. This sets our game apart from others that have standard resources and tech resources, but it does mean that different types of units will need a different balance. A squad of infantry will need a lot of manpower but little material, whereas a battle tank would need lots of material but less manpower. Maybe that does make ore our tech resource. After all, it could function that way. The nice thing about using manpower as a resource is it opens up a lot of possibilities when it comes to features and interactions that haven't been well explored before. This interests me, as there's no point just making the same old game with a different skin. Let me explain. We've got a basic infantry squad. This consists of 10 soldiers and costs, say, 10 manpower to train. When that squad takes damage, a little internal but invisible health bar goes down until it hits 0, and at that point we judge that one of the members' luck has run out. We remove a squad member, a little casualty counter is increased and the internal health bar is reset. As the squad continues to take damage, this process repeats. If the squad survives the ordeal, the next time it is in close proximity to a medical facility, the current casualty count is examined. 50% of that number are considered KIA and removed. The other 50% are judged as wounded and entered into a medical pool, and their manpower value will be reimbursed after a certain amount of time has passed. As an example, our squad engages a defensive turret, a battle they will win but not before they take 5 casualties. The squad and its 5 remaining members then retreat back to base. The casualty count is examined and half of that value will go into the medical pool to be returned later, half in this case either being 2 or 3 depending on luck. If we want to reinforce our squad, we pay 5 manpower, down comes a dropship and the squad's back up to its full complement of 10 soldiers. But fiddly mechanics shouldn't exist just for the sake of it, and there are several reasons for the inclusion of this one. Firstly, it serves our setting. We've presented the player with a story in which manpower is limited and therefore of great value, and now we have a game mechanic that reinforces that. Our soldiers are not cannon fodder, suicide charges are not the status quo, and our player must put some thought into each engagement. This allows us to show that manpower is important and somewhat restricted, without actually having to place hard limits on the number of soldiers you can train during any one battle. Secondly, we can develop a lot of abilities and upgrades that interact directly with this new mechanic. Some of these are obvious. There could be medical facilities and improvements to them that reduce the percentages of casualties that are KIA, or speed up the reimbursement of the manpower. There could also be some special unit abilities, perhaps a to the death activatable that instantly forces all casualties back into the fight, but they will permanently succumb to their wounds after a short time. It also opens up a whole line of support vehicles and structures that can be used to clear casualties near the front line and provide some much needed reinforcements. There's a lot of potential here, and we can use variations of these sorts of things to create meaningful differences between our 2 factions. As far as base building goes, I don't think I'd want to do anything too groundbreaking. A lot of great new games are iterations. They combine something new and innovative with something already tried and tested. If we're going to introduce a whole new manpower and casualty replacement system and build a lot of our abilities and interactions around that, then we probably don't want to try and invent a whole new way to build, gather and research too. We would start with our headquarters building, a combined command post or something like that. This would essentially be a small landing pad with a couple of prefab buildings. We would also start with an RCV, our resource collection vehicle, and a small squad of engineers or something similar. Our RCV can collect either copus or ore. A dropship would periodically arrive to transport that back to the Colossus and return with the new manpower. Ore could sit in neat little piles or maybe in a storage bin as part of the command post, but that's for the artist to decide, not me. The command post itself could probably allow the production of 3 different units: the resource collection vehicle, some engineers for building stuff, and probably some scouts for early intel and raiding. I like this sort of approach in Dawn of War and Company of Heroes, and I think it could work well for us here too. I think that resources of both types will be present in different spots all over the map. I don't see the need for any hard limits on the amount of collectors that can be stationed at any one resource, but I think the remote collection resource buildings should be available to cut down on journey time and allow remote bases. This could be additional command posts, but these should be reasonably expensive, and long distance collection shouldn't be too punishing, as I imagine each collector would gather a truckload like in Command & Conquer rather than a handful like in something like StarCraft. I don't think we would need to go too heavy on the base options, as our setting very much represents temporary remote mining operations rather than permanent strategic bases or mighty cities. I like to keep things simple, so we're probably looking at a few production structures to handle the creation of infantry squads and vehicles, and the usual smattering of turrets, bunkers and hospitals. I think we would also need some logistics buildings, as pop caps are generally quite important for steady growth and army limits. Remember, we're trying to represent small skirmishes rather than massive apocalyptic battles, so keeping things company-sized once again serves our setting. As with base building, we're not here to reinvent the wheel, and I think the population supply system used by Warcraft or something like Age of Empires is a logical and sane way to handle sensible growth. It also makes sense to me. Troops need to be fed, watered and have somewhere to lay their heads, and a collection of prefab barracks buildings would probably do the job well enough. The one thing I would want to do a little differently is upgrades, as researchers never sat too well with me, especially in games that represent the same force across multiple engagements. Why does everyone forget how to make stim packs between every battle? Granted, it is the most pedantic of nitpicks, but hey, if I got to make a game, it's something I would address. So research is out, and instead we're going to be enabling rather than brewing up new tech in the middle of each battle, and we're going to be once again tying it into our manpower system. I'll explain what I mean with a little example. Let's say we have an upgrade option that increases the line of sight of all our units and allows our recon squad to deploy a remote-controlled scout unit. In generic RTS, we would go to our research lab, click the radar upgrade button, pay some resources, wait a minute or two, and hey presto, our scientists have done the math and our upgrade is enabled. In Proxima, our top scientists have already come up with this technology safely back home in their labs, so what we need to do is access it in the field. Firstly, we construct a logistics bay. This can be constructed multiple times and each one has enough room to support several facilities. We want our soldiers to be able to see further, so we select our logistics bay and click the Drone Control Center button. This costs a wedge of manpower to represent the technicians and some materials to represent construction of the tools they need. That logistics bay now permanently contains a drone control center, and as long as it continues to exist, the benefits are provided. If for some reason this upgrade is no longer required, it can be deconstructed and the manpower returned to the pool. It's a slightly different feature that achieves the same goal as a more standard research system, but like our other ideas, it does have a purpose for this deviation. It adds a tiny bit more realism to the provision of upgrades, and more importantly, it does it in a way that aligns with our setting and emphasises the importance of manpower. You'll notice that there is one thing I keep coming back to as it's a key part of my design philosophy, and that of course is serving the setting. I think it's hard to overstate exactly how important this is when you're designing a game. The difference between a great game and an amazing game is hard to describe without a huge amount of deep investigation and explanation, as for most of us it just feels like some sort of magic that you can't put your finger on. But a big part of that magic is creating something where every mechanic, feature, story beat, and every aspect of the art and sound design doesn't just fit the atmosphere but actively serves to reinforce it. We have manpower as a key resource, plus a system of casualties, reimbursement and reinforcement because I find it an interesting idea. But that's not the only reason. It reinforces the limitations and the scale of the conflict that we've established in our setting. We're limited to a couple of hundred combatants a side because that's easily manageable by our players, but it's also representative of the men and material available for the kind of engagements that's covered by our story. Our reinforcements are arriving via dropship because we've got a ship in orbit and we're conducting small-scale operations. Recruiting, training and deploying soldiers in situ would feel out of place. We're contesting and collecting Copus not just because it grants us more manpower, but because it's a valuable strategic resource required by each of our factions. We're not conducting cutting-edge weapons research on our remote outpost because we've already established we've got a large industrial and tech base back on our home planets. If we were to continue this design process, we'd add more and more things that went on this list. Individually, none of them would really matter that much, but as a collection they all reinforce each other and create an experience that subconsciously makes a great deal of sense and satisfies our appreciation of internal logic. I want to demonstrate what I mean about how decisions can reinforce each other, and I think I know how to do that. Have you ever finished a game and been genuinely sad that it's over? Futilely scrolling through Google results, desperate to find something else like it, only to end up empty-handed and empty-hearted. This was me after completing Disco Elysium, a title that I think is possibly the finest RPG in the history of video games. You may or may not agree with me, that's cool, we're all different, but if you've not played it, I can't really describe it. It would take a 3-hour video essay for me to properly explain why I love the bittersweet comedic melancholy, the rich characterizations and the perfect storytelling that it provides, so instead I'm just going to focus on a single design decision to illustrate my point. Disco Elysium is set in a world that's probably akin to something that we might recognise in a small, non-specific European nation during the mid-1900s. But not quite. Technology levels and social political attitudes are sometimes more or less advanced than you might expect, but that's barely scratching the surface. Everything is a little off. Science is different, institutions are different and people are different, but not completely different, and that's what makes it so intriguing. If it was set in a truly fantastical land, you would just accept the differences, but because so much is similar, it creates a jarring effect where you both understand the world and feel completely out of place at the same time. The reason this is such a brilliant design choice is that your character is suffering from amnesia. Harry isn't just clueless about the odd-shaped hole in the window and the location of his left shoe, but the entire world around him and his place within it. And so are you. And because you are, you feel far more in touch with Harry's experiences. The developers could have set the game on a small island off the coast of France, a midwestern town, or in Narnia, but they chose to create a whole mirror universe-like land because it perfectly reinforced the sort of game they wanted to make and the kind of story they wanted to tell. Now, I love a good story, and just because we're making a strategy game, I don't think that we should regard it as an afterthought. Most people who play RTS hardly ever touch the multiplayer, especially the versus mode, so I would want someone to be truly satisfied even if they had no desire to touch the auto match button. To serve the story, I think I'd probably include 3 campaigns. The first would be shorter, a prologue of about 5 missions in length that would serve as both a tutorial and a proper introduction to our factions. I wouldn't expect anyone to watch a 10-minute cutscene before the game, so a lot of the introductory storytelling would take place in this prologue. These missions would depict the first armed gathering expedition and so the escalation that takes place as both factions ramp up their efforts to secure the Copus. The initial small scale that gradually builds would be perfectly suitable for us to introduce our players to the key mechanics and units, giving them agency but without overwhelming them with too much too fast. It would end with an important discovery relating to the previous occupants of the planet, probably something that contains suitable levels of danger and intrigue to set the scene for our 2 full-length campaigns. These campaigns would tell the story of how our 2 factions attempted to utilise or otherwise deal with this new discovery. If it was technology based, as things in sci-fi often tend to be, you can see how Fortuna and Bravados might have very different reactions to it, with both sides competing to try and enforce their vision, while at the same time attempting to secure enough resources to properly power their cities and industries back home. Someone would probably try something dangerous and underhanded that ultimately backfires and perhaps create a new threat that both factions have to deal with together. Who knows? I might own a microphone and a copy of Word, but I'm no storyteller. Anyway, that's my really rough proposal for a game. Like I say, it's never going to get made, but it was kind of fun to note some things down and have a think about how I would want it to work. Now that I've emptied my brain out onto the internet, I just want to say thanks for listening and thanks for watching my videos over the last year and a half. I'm very happy to have so many subscribers. Sure, I've got a long way to go before I can retire from my regular job and start selling my own branded energy drinks and ball shaving kits, but that's not really the Kaluven way of doing things. I've said it before, this is my hobby. It brings me a lot of joy and I'm glad my videos have entertained so many. As usual, I'm going to keep experimenting with new things. I want to try and do a bit more in the way of video every now and again. The voiceover work is easy when I'm talking about a specific game, but it can be pretty tough to animate and illustrate some of the more theory-based content that I've got on my to-do list, and I think my face might make a suitable substitution. Hopefully I should have something sorted in that department in the next few weeks. So let's continue the deal. I'll keep making videos, you keep watching them, and don't be shy about those likes and comments. I have to please the great algorithm somehow, and as I refuse to put red arrows or Mr. Beast's face on my thumbnails, I think it's my best chance. If you're not aware, I also have a Discord server. The link is in the description if you want to pop in and say hi. Sometimes we talk about games and occasionally we even play some together. Anyway, thanks again for watching and subscribing, and as usual, I very much hope to see you back soon.